Today, we're going to unpack a single piece of legislation that completely transformed the lives of over 1 million people, the Plantations Labor Act of 1951. It wasn't just another law. It was a foundational promise, a promise of dignity and welfare for the workers who were, quite literally, fueling one of India's biggest industries. So let's get into it.
To really get why this act was such a revolution, you have to understand what came before it. For decades, you see, the laws on the books, well, they weren't there to protect the people doing all the backbreaking labor. No, they were designed to protect the plantation owners. The whole system was just built for the employers, not the employees.
So, what was life actually like for these workers? Before we can appreciate the solution, we have to face the problem. And honestly, it was pretty grim.
And look, these words you see on the screen, they're not exaggerations. They're direct quotes from historical reports. Workers were living in what officials at the time called very unhygienic conditions. Medical care was described as very poor, and the result was as tragic as it was predictable: shockingly high death rates. This wasn't about a lack of comfort. This was a genuine life-and-death crisis.
A situation this bad, well, it couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, some key investigations started to blow the lid off these conditions on a national level, and that created a powerful push, a real catalyst for change.
But here's the thing. This change did not happen overnight, not even close. It was a long, hard fight that stretched over decades. It really kicked off back in 1931 with a report that first exposed just how terrible things were. 15 years later, a formal recommendation for a new law was finally made. It then took until 1951 for that law to even pass. And get this, another 4 years for it to actually go into effect. This was a marathon, not a sprint.
So, with the problem out of the open and a real momentum for change building, Parliament finally delivered its answer: the Plantations Labor Act of 1951.
So, what was this act really all about? Well, at its core, it had two simple but incredibly powerful goals. First, to regulate the work itself, things like hours and safety. And second, to guarantee welfare amenities, the absolute basics for a dignified life. This wasn't just a minor tweak. This was a whole new, humane standard for an entire industry.
And who exactly did this new law protect? The act was very specific. It applied to the big plantations. We're talking 5 hectares or more that had at least 15 people on the payroll. This covered the huge industries like tea, coffee, and rubber. But, and this is important, it also gave state governments the power to include other types of plantations, making sure its reach could grow where it was needed.
Okay, this is where we get to the heart of it. The act wasn't just a bunch of abstract principles. It demanded specific, tangible benefits that totally changed daily life for these workers. It was, in every sense of the word, a new deal.
So let's just run through some of the biggest guarantees. First up, the absolute most basic human need: clean drinking water. Remember those unhygienic conditions? Well, this law made it the employer's legal duty to provide a good supply of wholesome drinking water right where the workers could get to it.
Next, sanitation. The law demanded clean latrines and urinals. This was a direct attack on the squalor that came before, and it included a really crucial detail: separate facilities for men and women. That's fundamental for both basic dignity and for safety. Now, this next one, this was a true game changer. From a reality of very poor medical care and high death rates, the act completely flipped the script. Employers were now legally required to provide and maintain medical facilities that were readily available not just for the workers, but for their families too. That's huge.
The act also went big on welfare, starting with another massive shift: housing. For the first time ever, it became the employer's legal duty to provide and maintain proper housing for every single worker and their family. This created a foundation of stability and security that just hadn't existed before.
The law also recognized the very specific needs of working families. If a plantation employed 50 or more women, the owner had to provide and maintain creches, basically daycares for their young children. This was such a vital support system, letting mothers work knowing their kids were cared for.
And the vision extended to the next generation. If a plantation was home to more than 25 kids of school age, the employer had to provide educational facilities. This wasn't just about welfare. This was a direct investment in trying to break the cycle of poverty and create a real future for these communities.
And what about the work itself? Before this act, working hours were totally unregulated. The new law put a hard stop to that. The new maximum number of hours an adult could be required to work in a single week was 48.
And the act didn't just set one limit. It was smart. It created different protections based on age. So while adults were capped at 48 hours a week, it recognized that adolescents needed more protection. For workers between 14 and 18, the max was set way lower, at just 27 hours.
And the list just keeps on going. The act flat out prohibited hiring children under 14. It guaranteed a day of rest every single week. It established the right to annual paid leave. And it mandated sickness and maternity benefits. This was a truly comprehensive package of rights, the whole shebang.
Of course, rights on paper are pretty meaningless if there's no way to enforce them. So how did the act make sure that these new rules would actually be followed on the ground?
Well, it established a system of government oversight. States appointed a chief inspector and a whole team of inspectors. These officials were given the power to walk onto any plantation, to examine the books and conditions, and to make sure the law was being followed. They were the watchdogs.
And this law had real teeth. Non-compliance was not taken lightly. As you can see here, getting in an inspector's way or hiring people illegally could mean up to 6 months in prison and a hefty fine. And for repeat offenders, the penalties were even harsher. This sent a very clear message. The New Deal for workers was not optional.
So the Plantations Labor Act of 1951 was an absolute landmark achievement. It replaced a system of exploitation with a new framework of rights and welfare, setting a brand new standard for over 1 million workers. The question for us today, more than 70 years later, is how do we continue to build on that incredible legacy and make sure its promise of dignity isn't just a historical fact, but a daily reality for every worker?